my name's Ruth from Gothic Decay and I produce work that looks like this. So today I'm going to make a similar sort of piece, which again, excuse my terrible Photoshop, will look like this eventually. So I've printed it out onto the fabric and I will do a video on that in a bit, or you can see the last video I made where I did it too. So, right, we've got the backing piece of fabric. Excuse the fact that this is wonky, I am not the best with technology, so it prints it out where it wants it to do, rather than me having any say in it really. So it's a bit close to the edge, so it's not going to be ideal. But we're just going to move that down there a little bit, otherwise it won't go in the hoop. So we'll try and keep as much of this, basically if this edge piece is sort of along here, this hoop won't hold it properly straight, so it won't hold it properly taut. So we want as little, we want as much of this in the hoop as we possibly can get, so keep that edge as far as you can apart away. That'll make sense soon. Need a cup of tea. Right, so we pop it in the frame as we did before. On this piece you can see these little oh, we'll start off with doing the background. See, I forgot it last time, but we're going to do the window in the background first. So I've managed to find from the charity shop the best thing is very, very useful. It's a sheer fabric. You see what I mean when it just doesn't hold the tension quite as well, but we'll get there, it'll be okay. So yes, this stuff, which I believe is chiffon, but it's really, really useful because it's not shiny. See, this is the other stuff I could use, but I don't want the whole thing to look like a Christmas wrapping paper. So I shall use some of this and I shall chop it off. You know me and my frayed edges, so that will fray nicely. I have a little bit down here. Oops, like that. We'll fray up the edges nicely. Now don't overlap it too much, otherwise you get this sort of stripe. I don't know if you can see that quite well, but you know, layering it up like this, it'll just create darker bits. So we shall stitch that onto here using our invisible thread and just little tiny stitches. But while we're here, I'm also going to show you these bits here. So I'm going to make these triangles just in a bit of sheer fabric. See, this one's slightly shiny but not as bad. So we'll cut out these little shapes here. Let's do one of them now. Hope this works. That's how we did it before. There we go. So we'll line this up here. It doesn't matter if it's not perfectly straight and if there's frayed bits, because, well, like I say, you know my work is covered in frayed bits. So we'll cut this bit off here. Lay it down like that. Whoops. Lay it down like that. And cut it along here. Ideally a little bit bigger than the piece, just because it's better to have a bit more. See, it's got a little bit in there, but that's not going to matter. And because there's a sort of stripe of grey and then the darker colour, I'm going to put a second piece here like that, so that you've got this piece. So I will, anyway, you get the idea. I'm going to cut out all these bits of sheer stuff and then I shall use the invisible thread to stitch them into place on here. So when I've done that, I will be back. I've stitched down these little bits of sheer fabric and the chiffon in the background. So we're now all ready to start playing. This is expander print, which kind of, it's a gungy paste that when you heat it with a heat gun, it bubbles up. So a little bit like sort of puff paint and that kind of thing. So in the background of here, through the window, is a lot of rubble. It's not terribly obvious on here. Not terribly obvious on there either, but maybe a bit. Anyway, it's there. So what I will do is put little patches of this in, and again, like before, grab your little individual so I stick my finger in it. So a little of this goes a very long way. So I'm just gonna dibbly dabbly bits, technical term, you understand, here and there. For me personally, this is one of those products that is better to have a bit less of it, and you can always add more, because to me personally it can get a little bit plasticky looking and a bit strange. So this is just the first layer of stuff. So I shall now, to excuse the noise, I've plugged in my heat gun. Hopefully it won't go bang. So we shall see what happens now. There. So as I attempted to show you there, so this is all the puff paint has started to, or the expander print has started to puff up, but as you'll notice, the chiffon really didn't like the heat from the heat gun and has all disappeared and burnt back, but we shall use that to our advantage as a different little layer of texture. So I don't want to cover the whole thing in just this, so I am going to add, when I put them somewhere safe, and that's always a danger with me, put something somewhere safe and you'll never see it again. Little bits of, this is something left over from another project. It's a piece of fabric that is, actually it's gone over with some expander print, very, very pale, you know, very slight amount, and then painted, to just create little little bits of interest in the rubble. Oh, that sounds bad, doesn't it? Artistic rubble, but you know what I mean. So I will pin these down like that. I know I do funny things with my pins, but it's just the way I like it. You probably hear a helicopter going over now. That's handy. Thank you, Mr. Helicopter. Anyway, so I don't want these to suffer from what my mum calls the dreaded stuck-on syndrome. So I'm going to want to cover little bits just to disguise them a little bit. So I've got a bit of luchador, the famous luchador, which again I will do a video on one time, and I'll stitch that into place. And then I've got some little odds and bits of thread, the little oddie bits like this, which aren't really terribly useful for a lot of projects, but you can use for little French knots and things, to create little sort of rocky shapes and thingamajigs. So what I'll do is I'll stitch this down and then we'll go from there. So I've stitched these pieces into place, but I'm not entirely sure I'm going to bother with the little French knots and things just yet, because I'm going to put things on top of it, and this flower is going to be quite big as well. So I think if I put too much on there, it might just all get covered up. So we'll see in a bit. What I will do though is paint the it's not luchador at all, it's expander print, so that it's not just white and looks a bit more rubbly. This, if it bleeds onto the rest of the bits and bobs, that's not a problem, because again, as I said before, my mum is always terrified of stuck-on syndrome, and this will help with that. And that's come out. Isn't that funny, isn't it? Normally when I paint this, it's almost impossible to get it to colour nicely, but not today. So we'll go and get some water and be back. Right, as if by magic, water appears. So we'll just water this down a little bit. A bit more. There we go. So we'll wait for that to dry. There we go. See, that's what it's supposed to do. You see, it goes grey, and then the top bits go paler than the bits underneath. Don't know if that helps. helps at all. But anyway, we might add a bit of pale to it later. We'll see how it looks when it's dry. So everything's now dry, and you can see we've got a couple of, what should we call them, oopsies or luchador moments or something like that, where the water has come through and it's, I did it without thinking, and the printing is all spread. So because this is just printing ink, you get water on a printout and it will spread. But that's all right. We'll just have a luchador moment or something or other and cover it up, disguise it. No one will ever know. So what I'm now going to do is, you can see in my picture here, the window has got lots of these sort of bars in it, I suppose. So I was going to stitch those. I'm not going to use black because it can be quite a distracting colour, and you just end up making it look a bit like a zebra. So I'm going to just do this very dark grey little bit of normal sewing cotton. Came into the charity shop. Have that, thank you very much. And then I will stem stitch these little bars in here just to add a little bit of definition, but like I say, to keep the zebra away. So all we shall do, pick a line, doesn't really matter which one, and we shall stem stitch our way to the bottom. So I'm sure you can work out how this is going to go. So I will come back to you when we're all done. So we're just going to, I didn't think of that, we'll just go over the top of these just to try and avoid the stuck on syndrome. Try and blend everything in a little bit like it's meant to be there. And if you get to a bit like this where the line has disappeared, what I often do is just lay it down flat where you want the line to go, and then put a stitch in based on that. So, right, I'll be back when this is all done. I've finished off all the little bits of stitching. Not all of the lines were completely solid, so I've just done little broken lines again to avoid the whole zebra thing. I haven't yet done the diagram stitching. These are just the sort of bars from the window. I will decide whether that's going to stay or not. It's one of those things, it's a work in progress. You don't have to follow everything in your design. So, for example, I thought that, well, we've got a little bit of luchador to cover up the luchador moment here. And then I've added a few bits of paper. This is from a different bit, but they're from like a die cut shape. So you just colour the paper, cut it out on the die cutter, and you end up with something that looks like that, and then you just stitch them on into position. So I don't know if you can see them properly, but they're just in here, and I've put a bit of luchador over there because I thought it just looked a bit flat and plain and a bit weird, so just trying to gribby it up and give it a bit more texture. So all I'm going to do is, with the famous invisible thread, is just stitch all of this into place. So the paper, I try not to, oh, that's another thing, yeah. If you, because I tend to mount this onto a different piece of fabric, I won't stitch the bits that go over the edges. So see these little, everything in this coloured square, I will stitch into place. But anything that pokes out the edge, I'll just leave it to flap free, and then I can sew it to the piece of fabric in the end. So we just want everything in this little square. Hope that makes sense. Makes sense in my head. So all we do is just put little tiny stitches over the top until it stops flapping about. I think I should probably say it in a slightly more technical way than that, but that's all we're doing. And it will hold all the bits of luchador down nice and flat and catching the pins. I know the way I do my pins is funny. It's just sometimes I don't want to split the paper because it'll, you know, you get little holes where the needle's gone through and things. I don't really want that. So I'm just holding it roughly in place. They're only little, so they won't move far. And you'll see as well that because they all go over everything, this is another layer of texture. It's avoiding that stuck-on syndrome from Mum. So hopefully it will, because there's so many things piled on top of each other, it will stop having that effect. So I will stitch these into place, because I'm sure you can imagine what putting little tiny stitches over paper is like. And when I've done, I will come back to you. Right, so next bit is this flower. Now I've tried a few things and just ended up with everything looking a bit like some kind of frilly knickers on the end of it. So what we're going to do is pretend it was never there. So everything's stuck down, as you see. So we're going to put a little bit more of this, I think we've probably forgotten what it's called. Oh, chiffon, that's the word I'm looking for. Completely left me there for a moment. We're going to put a little bit of that on there, a little bit of that on there, like the flower was never there. And now it just adds a little bit of kind of colour interest instead. So I'm going to stick that on there, and with the famous invisible thread. It's like everything in my work is stuck with invisible thread. I'll be back when I've done it. You know, you've seen all this before, exactly the same, just stitching the little tiny bits over the top of there until it doesn't move around anymore. Right, so I know there's a bit of a jump here, but this, sometimes you just get an embroidery that's being a bit of a pain, and this is being one of those bits of a pain. So I'm not entirely convinced about this, and I keep pondering it, and I've slept on it and all kinds of things, and I'm still not convinced on it. So we will leave it for now. So what I have done is cut out the piece like I did before, see, with just a couple of millimetres around it, and then painted that white fabric black. This chiffon-y stuff was sticking out rather nicely from the edges, which is not what I normally do, but it I just really rather liked it, so I've kind of added to bits of that by putting some of this luchador on. Video to follow, I'm sure. So we're going to ignore this bit for a minute and come back to it. So all I'm going to do is stitch these. Well, this isn't stitched down either yet, so I'm going to stitch this into position onto the black fabric. Then I'm going to stitch the luchador on here, and while I'm stitching that, I shall ponder the how do we put this nicely, frustrating bit in the middle. I've tried beads on there to make it look like little flowers sort of popping up through the undergrowth. I've tried tea bag paper and various other ways of making flowers, and they just all end up looking like sort of frilly bloomers. So we'll ponder it while we stitch this into place. So we'll put on some nice metal music, industrial metal music, it's my favourite. Always nice and calming for a piece of work that isn't going to plan. So I shall stitch this onto here. Usual technique, invisible thread, needle, stitches, there, into fabric. So I'll come back to you when this is looking flatter, and hopefully I've come up with a solution for this. Okie dokie, so I have stitched on all of the luchador and some bits and bobs. So I'm liking the outside because it's slightly bigger, the frame. It needed a bit more floofing around the outside, but this bit is still driving me up the wall. So we're going to take it off, and then maybe add some stitching in and see how we get on with that. And it looks a bit hairy, but we'll get rid of that in a minute. So we shall now decide whether we're going to leave this as it is, or we're going to add a bit of few bits of stitching onto the top. So what I shall do is sit and look at it for a bit and see how I get on. Well, here we are. This is the picture that it was supposed to look like. This is what it does look like. I don't know if I like it or not. I don't know if it's even going to make it to the final take, so the final edit. But we've learnt, and that's the main thing. So I've just taken this back to how it originally was. Took the this and that off it, stitched it down a little bit just to make it a bit clearer, because the chiffon had kind of come away from the initial backing because I've been playing around with it. Anyway, we'll see what happens, and maybe there'll be an update to this video in the future, or maybe you won't hear any of this and it'll just stop and miraculously appear looking great at some other point. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed the video, even though I haven't finished making this properly. But if you'd like to see more, please do. It helps me an awful lot if you could like and subscribe my channel. And onwards and upwards for next week. So thanks ever so much for watching.